couple of years ago, I made this video here during one of the adpocalypse waves, so, it was claimed, then unviewable in like 8 countries. But anyway, it was a video about the problem that The Witcher 3 posed to both Cyberpunk and CD Projekt Red. The underlying message of that video was that the expectations created by The Witcher 3, both from a hype perspective and a financial one, very well could spell disaster for Cyberpunk. It wasn't a video predicting that the game would suck, but that it had huge obstacles to overcome that other games simply didn't. Well, turns out that was one of those nail-on-the-head moments. Cyberpunk 2077 has been one of gaming's most unique train wrecks of the past 2 generations. And here's something a bit more polarizing: I don't hate it at all. Am I disappointed? Absolutely, but I played it for a good 60 hours, so that should tell you something. So today, instead of looking at the game from a review perspective, I want to look at it from the 1,000 feet up a few months after launch perspective. What exactly happened to Cyberpunk, and how did CD Projekt Red set this thing up to fail so spectacularly? Oh, and yes, I will talk about why I played it for a full 60 hours myself, because, well, there is some good here.
Good to see you, thank you.
Hey everyone.
So let's get something out of the way here. If you haven't read Jason Schreier's report on the development cycle of this game, you should do that. Now, let's talk about what Cyberpunk was before it released. Cyberpunk's pre-release cycle was incredibly abnormal. Cyberpunk 2077 was announced in 2012, literally 9 years ago. CD Projekt Red gained the rights to the tabletop RPG and later gave their future game a name. A teaser would come in 2013, then 6 years later, a 2020 release date would be announced, April 16th. In September 2019, however, the first sign of actual trouble showed itself. CD Projekt Red announced a delay, stating that the game would be out 6 months later than expected. Why? Because while the game was playable, in their words, it needed more time to be great. Having to announce 6 months before release that your game is playable after 9 years should have been at least a caution flag. And here's where things got weird. For now, let's assume the game had 5 years of active development. So a few months later, another delay to November was announced. That's right, another delay. Why is this weird? Because now the game would essentially be launching alongside a new generation of consoles without actually having the game ready for either of those new systems. After again, at least 5 years, of active development. But we'll come back to that because good news, the game went gold, ready to be shipped, and then it got delayed again. This should have been the biggest red flag. A delay after a gone gold announcement. The team said the day 1 patch was taking longer than expected, and the game would now launch in December. Remember, games used to launch without day 1 patches at all. But what this means is that after going gold, the team still didn't think the game was ready. So now, Cyberpunk, after being announced before the launch of the PS4, would release after the launch of the PS5. But still on the PS4 for now. What Fallout 4 got so right should be the industry standard. It was announced and launched all within 6 months. But games aren't announced for us. They're announced for stock prices and investors, financial calls and earning reports, publishers. So before we get to why everything that happened after happened and why the game released when it did, we'll have to look at what happened to the game at launch. So time to play. Except review footage would only be PC footage. Why? What was there to hide? Well, this abnormal request was not only sneaky and a fairly big breach of trust, but it had reason. What you're seeing now is a compilation of bugs. What's interesting about this video is that in 2 minutes, he sums up everything you need to know about the first 2 weeks of Cyberpunk 2077. So before we get to the actual gameplay, which frankly is its own can of worms, we have to address the elephant in the room that those delays somehow ignored. Cyberpunk did not, and still does not, work on consoles. And not in the it's not a bug, it's a feature Bethesda way, in the this has foundational game-breaking issues kind of way. What's worth pointing out right away is that originally Cyberpunk was a third-person action game like The Witcher. That was the plan. Mid-development, they decided that first-person was a better fit, and that's a huge shift. It's a massive technical hurdle to overcome, and it shows the fear and uncertainty harbored by management post-Witcher 3. What's become even more clear now is that upper management of CD Projekt Red woefully misunderstands game development, and frankly, in some ways, simple business sense. As an investor, you're taught a simple rule. Investing is usually a long-term play because in the short term, you're just gambling. And gamble they did. In order to capitalize on short-term market gains like the holiday season and new consoles, CD Projekt Red's upper management forced a game out that was probably a year away from being finished. So I'll tell you about my experience. On PC, I actually had an okay-ish time in terms of problems. However, I'm running an i9 and a 3090, so it better run well. But on console, I have never been more frustrated with a game, including Fallout 76. Maybe I was just unlucky, or most likely the norm, but I experienced a serious immersion-breaking problem in almost every single play session. Floating AI, horrific pathing, horrific vehicle pathing, cars running through barriers, flying off the road, loot floating off the ground. But that's all superficial. My problem and the game's problems were far more serious. Missions that literally would not complete without reloading the game, AI not spawning properly, the game crashing entirely, texture popping that bordered on unreasonable, frame rate issues, and then they get more non-traditional. The first shot on an enemy would often hit, then they duck for cover and be at full health still. Enemies that wouldn't die. This list is just my experience. Despite devs that knew the game wasn't ready, Cyberpunk made a massive but calculated mistake. Upper management believed what Bethesda believes, that their previous work would mean that gamers would simply overlook their mistakes. That the infrastructure of modern gaming meant that they could put out an unfinished product and gamers would accept the flaws and expect them to be fixed down the line because that literally is the reality of modern gaming. But what they overlooked was something more interesting, because something entirely unprecedented would happen instead. See, part of the reason that gamers weren't willing to overlook the problems with Cyberpunk is the very reason they released it early: new consoles. In an effort to get in on that hype, they forgot or just overlooked the fact that those new consoles meant gamers would have heightened expectations on the technical and substantive sides of gaming. Regardless of whether or not the game was still technically a last-gen game, millions of people wanted to play it on their new systems. When you take the hype of a shiny new product, like a PS5, and feed it a broken, generations-old feeling disc, its flaws become more apparent, more immediate. But they also forgot that there were other companies involved in this transaction. Sony did not win the Western markets during the PS3 era for a slew of reasons, despite winning the Japanese and European markets dramatically. So the PS4 was a huge industry shift. Therefore, the PS5 was an opportunity for Sony to cement their PR and sales dominance. So here's where things went south. Cyberpunk drops, people are upset that the game is broken, and people want refunds. So what does CD Projekt Red do? They tell people on PS5 and 4 to go to Sony and they'll give them refunds. Besides releasing a broken game, this move is by far the biggest blunder in maybe the last 10 years of gaming. Sony, the place where most people will play their game, instantly began being flooded with refund requests. So now Sony is launching a new console. They have no choice but to adhere to the request, to acquiesce so that they don't become the target of the bullet as they try to sell a new generation of systems and market themselves as the winner of gaming, as the good guys. So what does Sony do? They pull the game from their digital store. Pull it. It becomes completely unpurchasable digitally on Sony platforms. A move that has literally no precedence, has never been done on this scale. Sony's reasoning? Public allies. It was simple. Until you fix your broken mess of a game, we are not going to let our customers get screwed by selling them this product on our storefront. So CD Projekt Red tried to throw Sony under the bus, and this became one of the biggest moments in the past few years of gaming. It's a console maker acknowledging how broken a new release actually is, and dodging the bullet altogether. Again, mostly to avoid all the refund requests, but still, the worst thing that could have happened PR-wise to CD Projekt. But this all leads me to what I think was actually the bigger issue, and it's quite a lot simpler. Look, none of this would have mattered if underneath all of this, the game was exceptional. People might have been able to overlook some of these flaws, and this is where I'm going to differ from a lot of people in opinion. I actually like what Cyberpunk is underneath all of this. And to be clear, you can be very disappointed in a game and still enjoy it. I repeat that, you can be very disappointed in a game or movie or any kind of media and still enjoy it. With mouse and keyboard, I think the combat and gunplay is fun. Clunky, but fun. Melee combat is simplistic, but beautifully visceral. Without getting too spoilery, I found the story to be enjoyable. I love Jackie and Panam and Judy, and I was actually impressed by the world when it functioned as it should. If Cyberpunk worked, I'd probably have given the game like an 8 out of 10. I think it's very good. However, from a gameplay perspective, it's also a massive disappointment, and that's not just the fault of the gameplay. The problem with revealing games too early, like Cyberpunk, is that you then have to spend an inordinate amount of time maintaining the hype. Getting the hype going isn't the problem at that point, it's that you suddenly, for years, have to find ways to one-up what you've shown and said previously. So what was Cyberpunk sold as? A massive, open-world, immersive sim of an RPG that allowed you to be anyone, to roleplay. A game where the world was fully interactable, with an unbelievably large arsenal of weaponry to boot. How was it driving? Well, amazing. Just look at this trailer. The weapons? Insane! Look at this trailer. The world? Well, here's this trailer. And what happens at this point? Well, you play it yourself. All those locked doors across the city that look like you should be able to enter them? Well, you were supposed to. They got cut to get the game out earlier. Pick your background and be a street rat versus a corpo? Yeah, that's really just a different selection of dialogue choices here and there and a different first couple hours. All those different endings, just reload a relatively recent save and make a few different choices and you're trophy hunting. The weapons, well, very few of them are all that memorable for most of the game, but they're there and there's a talking SMG. And the driving? Yeah, no. That's not good. That doesn't work. But I think what's most disappointing is how brief the entire core experience really is. When you create trailer after trailer of how dense and huge your game and its world are, and then right before launch through interviews and publications sneak in 30 or so hours, it feels a little disingenuous. It's not a lie, it wasn't a turnabout, it just felt a little weird. Cyberpunk clearly was supposed to be a bigger game, a better, more immersive one. People have found the code in the doors for proof of this. If you had marketed the game as what it was, which was a much more reasonably contained experience, expectations would have shifted accordingly, and again, what would be underneath would be an 8 out of 10, instead of scrutinized to the point of it falling flat in almost every category. So what this game became instead was another one that fell victim to the Skyrim problem. This is a phenomenon I find really interesting. Remember Agents of Mayhem? If this were a poll, I'd imagine maybe half of you would be nodding your head right now. This is the developer of Saints Row branching out from the series to try to create something new. So what is Agents of Mayhem? It is literally Saints Row, but quite a bit less fun and less focused on vehicles. Seriously, that is exactly what it is. Why? Because Volition believed in the old adage, if it ain't broke, try to fix it only a little and repaint it. It failed. It failed like Fallout 76, a similar one big change and many steps backward approach. But how many games over the last 2 gens can you say are just attempting to emulate a simple reality? The Skyrim effect. Every game needs to be a massive, open, play it forever RPG. The phenomenon of chasing the peak of a genre endlessly. The Witcher 3 worked, in part because it was third-person Skyrim. It made many improvements on the formula, it shifted the space, and took massive steps forward and almost none back. So it begs the question, why then did CD Projekt Red try to, in nearly every way, step backwards again and create a tech future painted Skyrim? In Skyrim, almost every building can be entered. There's a beautiful variety of tools and weaponry, the RPG tree is incredible in how it lets you build your characters, the sense of exploration and variety is heightened massively, and somehow a decade later, Cyberpunk attempts all of this and falls short in nearly each of those ways. The open world RPG obsession is cannibalizing studios and publishers. Not necessarily in quality, but in terms of output. I love AC Odyssey, for instance, but that game is barely Assassin's Creed anymore. It's stealthy Witcher 3. I loved Need for Speed. Now it's an open world car RPG. I enjoyed Metro Exodus, now a semi-open world RPG, Breath of the Wild, Zelda open world RPG. The point isn't that these games are bad. It's the opposite. The point is that studios are now chasing this single genre, chasing a game, frankly, in Skyrim and some in GTA and its sales, so much so that it's becoming harder and harder to adapt within the space and succeed because of it. What do I mean by this a little more concisely? Another example is the Destiny chase that brought down Anthem and Avengers. Different genre, same reality. The same one that brought down Mass Effect Andromeda in that open world RPG space again. What CD Projekt Red did wrong is foundational. They took an incredibly talented team of devs and told them to chase a direction that over the 9 years since the genesis of the game's idea was evolving in a way that the dev team simply couldn't keep up with. Again, the Skyrim effect. If you're not Skyrim, then you need to stay ahead of everyone else. You have to move forward. As a result, Cyberpunk was always set up to be a great but not revolutionary RPG. Even if it had worked, it would be a very good game that wouldn't move the needle all that much in the genre. They chased the trophy game of a generation, but took a generation to finish their submission. They weren't thinking nearly far enough ahead. And that kind of brings me to the conclusion of this look at the businessy side of Cyberpunk, mostly because it completes this little circle perfectly. They were not thinking far enough ahead. It wasn't just short-sightedness in polishing the game, it was in finishing the world, in evolving systems, in creating new or fresh gameplay realities. In every single way, short-sightedness is what created the mess the game now finds itself in. And yet here we are. The game is already very profitable. Still doesn't work, but made a lot of people very rich, despite what some of the reports might tell you. The sad thing is, I don't think the devs who wanted to finish their game really care about that. The salaried employees that are just looking to make something great, I assure you no one loved and was more excited about this game than them. They are more disappointed than any of us. So then what's the moral of all of this? What can we take away from all of this as people that actually buy video games? Well, it's simple. E3 was a place where industries got together and spewed all their marketing BS at the same time. We all thought, that sucks. But what E3 was competition. The best stood out, indies got discovered, but with the new digital announcements reality, the hype cycle is now ubiquitous. It exists in perpetuity. And unlike E3, there's often no one there to interview the devs or to get answers. We are in some ways more blind to what we're buying than ever, with game companies constantly getting their own mini E3s with nothing to compete with. At least not immediately. So the answer is really simple. Do your research. Seriously, like you would before buying a car or a fridge. Are lead writers and developers leaving en masse mid-development like Anthem? Are reviews limited to PC gameplay footage? Is the game being built on a brand new engine that an RPG has not been built on, like Mass Effect Andromeda? Has it been delayed 9 times? Manipulate the context, and these are all reasons you might wait to see how it goes before buying a new model of a car, or getting on a new model of airplane, or buying a new computer or a house. So why are so many people still ignoring the red flags of game development? There's too much information out there. We've seen enough to understand the patterns of development that are positive, negative, and sometimes don't mean anything at all. But gaming is still an industry. If you find a hair in your food, fine, maybe, but if you find 3, maybe stop eating and order something else. Well guys, as you can now tell, I'm back. I'm sorry for the brief hiatus. As a lot of you know, I wasn't very healthy. I explained a lot of this in a community post, but in that community post, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be happening on Clean Prints moving forward and forever. I'm going to be doing this thing where like each month, a certain percentage of the revenue goes to a small YouTuber. You guys get to vote for who that YouTuber is. On top of that, a percentage of each and every dollar of the sponsorship revenue on this channel is going to go to a charity of your guys' choice as well, starting with my choice. But I'll talk about all that in the community post that will be up the day after this, or maybe it's already up. I'm not really sure, but check the community tab on the channel for all that information. I just figured, you know, I'm excited to come back. I'm excited to talk games with you guys, and I love this community, and it would be really cool if we could build like an even bigger community, but more pertinently, if we could actually help other communities and do some cool stuff on YouTube. I'm really blessed to have you guys and to have this platform, and after the year we've all had, and a lot of you know the year I've had, you know, it really feels right to be able to, you know, do some good and help some other people out. So yeah, I am back. Videos will come 2, 3, 4 times a week. Honestly, whenever I'm able to do them, they'll come. Again, if you like this video, press the like button, press subscribe so you don't miss any of those. Hit the notification bell. I think that's the only way you guys are gonna see my videos for a while because I have been gone for so long, so hit the notification bell. And yeah, hopefully I will see you guys in the next video.